The chair calls the Pollution Control Committee public review meeting to order. Roll call, we have 8 of 11 members. We have a quorum. And for number 2, appearances of the public on a non-agenda related item. Do we have any?
There have been no requests to speak for public comment. Thank you.
We will move to number 3, new business. 3A, items to be presented for action. Recommend and adopt the findings of fact and approval of the Lake Shore Recycling System application for site location for the Henson Recycling Campus Transfer Station. And those are found in our packet on pages 2 through 20. So we will be having a discussion and vote whether each of our points, whether it does or does not meet the criteria. So we will start with 1.1, and that, I think I'll do the motion once I read it, right? I believe. So 1.1, adopt a finding that the proposed facility does or does not violate 415 ILCS 5-22.14, which prohibits locating a transfer station less than 1,000 feet from any residential dwelling or from properties zoned for primary residential use. And I need a motion. I have a motion by Abraham and a second by Abel. Now we'll have discussion. If we look, the finding of facts on that, I think you can find on page 5. So,
May I ask a question?
please.
Just a point of order, just as a clarification of the process. So the question that you've just read and that we have a second and a motion and a second on is a discrete item that is not the greater question of approval or non-approval, is that correct?
It is the approval of, but if we don't, so we either vote thumbs up or thumbs down on it, whether it does adopt the finding that the proposed facility violates.
Right. So we'll vote on 1.1, 1.3, and
Correct.
1.2 and 1.3, and then we'll have a greater vote?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. That was my question.
If 1 or 2 do not pass, then we don't even move to 3. Does that make sense? Because I believe that's correct. Is that not correct, Counselor?
Thank you, Chair. I do agree with that. And just for clarification, before the meeting, all the committee members were given an agenda that broke down the 3 sub-issues identified by Hearing Officer Price. So Hearing Officer Price suggested that this committee address each one of these 3 items. And as the chair stated, an affirmative vote is needed on all 3 of those in order to approve the application. And as a point of clarification, if I may, I believe that the way that this first sub-issue as to jurisdiction was phrased kind of left unclear as whether the motion is to make a finding that there is a violation or there is not a violation of that statute.
So our motion, to be clear, the motion is to approve that it does not violate. Does everybody understand that the motion was that it does not violate, which means if we agree that it does not violate the residential use, then we would move on to 1.2. Is there any discussion? Seeing no discussion, All in favor of 1.1, and that's adopting the finding that the proposed facility does not violate 415 ILCS 5-22.4, say aye. Opposed?
Yes.
One opposed. Went. That motion passes. Moving to 1.2, adopt a finding that the notice delivered by the applicant satisfies Section 29.2 of the Act. 29.2 was notice that was delivered and meets the satisfaction for Section 39.2. May I have a motion? I have a motion by Member Hanson, a second by Member Klein. Discussion. Seeing no discussion, we're going to vote for 1.2 and adoption, the finding that the notice delivered by the applicant satisfies Section 29.2 of the Act. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? And that came from Member Wendt, is that correct? And one opposed, Member Wendt. Now we will go to 1.3 and adopt a finding whether the proposed facility with those with any conditions that were identified satisfies the siting criteria for Section 39.2. And those are found on page 19. So those special conditions would be identified in detail starting on page 19. And I need a motion for that. And a motion by Member Friedrich and a second by Member Abel. And discussion.
Madam Chair, if I may,
Please.
I would suggest to the committee that as the committee consider whether the criteria are met, if the committee decides that the criteria have been met, that the proposed findings of fact and conclusions of law be adopted as the recommended findings of fact and conclusions of law for the county board, so that each of those findings on pages 18 and 19 of your packet would become adopted by the county. If, again, if the committee does view those criteria as having been met. If they have not, if the committee finds that any one of the criteria have not been met, I would suggest making an amendment to the proposed findings of fact and conclusions of law to reflect in what way you believe that the criteria have not been met, and that could then become the adopted recommendation for the full county board's consideration. Thank you.
So at this point, conditions, additional amendments can be added to these, should this committee choose to add additional conditions. However, if none are, the board can also propose those. Is that accurate? If this committee doesn't propose any conditions, additional or amendments, then does the county board have the ability to do that? Members of the county board.
I believe so, Madam Chair, but if you would give me just one moment to review our ordinance to confirm that ability, I don't want to provide any misinformation. Yes, I stand by my previous comment. Under the McLean County Code, Section 289-13, it does appear that the county board is to consider the full record of the public hearing and the findings of fact and this committee's recommendations when it makes its own determination as to the need for any special conditions.
Member Klein?
It's just a point of clarification. So the motion that's on the floor, which is listed on our agenda as 1.3, if we vote in the affirmative to that, we are voting to conclude that the 22 items given to us by the hearing officer on pages 18 through 20 as findings of fact and conclusions of law, that we accept those. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Does that then include those 3 conditions, and we won't have a special vote on those 3 special conditions?
We would not have to have, oh, I'm sorry. We will not have to have a separate, because these are conditions related to those 19 items, or 20 items that are found on pages 18 through 20.
Thank you.
Member Friedrich?
I have a question. Is this committee the policing body for the facility? For example, like if the landscape is not done properly or certain items in these points are not met, who's the policing body?
Madam Chair, I believe that I agree with the statement that this body would not be the policing or the enforcement mechanism for these conditions or for this agreement. To the extent that they're under county jurisdiction, it would fall to each department that enforces a particular ordinance. So if there was for example, overweight vehicles on a county road, again, this isn't a county road, but then that would be the highway department. It could be building and zoning, depending on if there were a signage issue. So again, it depends on what part of this permit, I guess, the issue arose under.
So when the Zoning Board of Appeals places restrictions or amendments to an approved special use, then it is up to the policing of that, then has to fall on the department, which would be the land use, building and zoning department. So do we, if we put additional, or do we need to identify who will do that in this approval, or is it a given?
My suggestion would be not to include that kind of enforcement priorities or scheme in these conditions. I think that would be an internal kind of county matter in terms of how we're going to enforce county ordinances. We have to enforce ordinances evenly, across the county. So I wouldn't want to create any kind of special attention. I think that would just kind of, and it also isn't part of it wouldn't necessarily be part of the 9 criteria that have been identified by statute.
So moving on to that policing, then policing, from what I understand, from what I have seen as a board member and as a citizen, that the policing for the building and zoning department is based on complaints. So should, as an example, you brought up number 2, should special condition number 2 not be met, then it would be the only way that the county would be able to police this or enforce this would be through complaints and then a follow-up. I believe that is accurate, and I want to confirm that with either Mr. Sierra or Ms. Taylor. With that, is my statement accurate?
If I could add one thing to my previous comment, I guess, for example, special condition number 2 regarding maintenance of the landscaping buffers for the proposed facility, that wouldn't actually be an ordinance violation if that weren't done. So the actual enforcement mechanism might be the Illinois Pollution Control Board or the EPA, because I think they would be responsible for regulating any operational pollution control facility.
So complaints could potentially come here, but then we would refer those individuals then to the EPA? Is that how this process would work? I guess I think that's where you're trying to get some clarity. Is that accurate?
I just opening up a can of worms, but there's a lot of criterias, and I see all those points.
Just using number 2 as an example, but you're
The
seeing,
least offensive, you know?
Madam Chairperson. I would just say, I mean, it's my understanding from the reading of the statute that the ILEPA does regular visits to these sites. So it's not, pardon? There are records of regular visits to all transfer stations that we have seen other companies, other places. So that just gives me the evidence that they do that. So it wouldn't necessarily have to be, I don't think, a complaint to the highway department. That would be noticed upon inspections. I believe that to be the case.
If I may, I agree with Member Klein. We saw evidence that the Illinois Pollution Control, or sorry, the IEPA had been inspecting the current facility at Kirk and the Henson disposal facility. So the record does contain evidence of that role that IEPA is playing.
does that answer your question, Member Friedrich? Moving to the question, though, related to overweight. And this is just a question I have, and that is the current, or as it was approved, this subdivision road, and that might move into special condition 3, is not the weight limits or the weight requirements are less for subdivision than they are for a county road. So if we would want higher weight requirements for those roads, like 80,000-pound roads, is this where we would add that? Or is that something we cannot do, or did I not understand the process as it proceeded earlier this year, or last year, late last year?
I think this would be the appropriate place to add a special condition for weight limits.
Please, microphone, please.
Sorry, off of the microphone, there was the suggestion that we can't do that. I thought that in the, sorry, I'm back to the 1,400-page document, that the county highway department's report to the hearing officer indicated this concern about the weight capacity of the road. And it was my general understanding that the special conditions that were outlined by the hearing officer were based on those staff reports and concerns raised by staff. So I suppose my question is, does criteria number 3 already include this requirement put forth by our highway department? This is page 393 of the full transcript document, and wherein there are specific references to 6 inches of hot mix asphalt and on a 12-inch aggregate base, et cetera, et cetera. There are 5 delineations there. So my question is, are those already inherent in the stipulation number 3?
I think
Mr.
that is
Sierra.
potentially, thank you, Madam Chair. I believe that it's potentially ambiguous at this point because condition number 3 says that the applicant shall construct and dedicate the HDI court, skipping that next portion, but it's to the standards set by McLean County. So even though it's not going to be within McLean County's jurisdiction, the condition is that McLean County would be setting those standards. So if this committee would like to explicitly incorporate the standards set forth by the highway department into this condition, that can certainly be done.
Okay, well then, with the permission of the chair, I'd like to make a motion to amend special criterion 3, special condition 3, and I can read it aloud, but the 5 recommendations put forth by Jerry Stokes, our county engineer, on page 393 of the approved transcript document. Do I need to read them into the record, sir?
I think that'd be a good idea.
Okay, here goes. Number 1, to accommodate the additional truck traffic, HDI Court should be constructed with a 6-inch of hot mix asphalt on a 12-inch aggregate base. This would allow for easier future maintenance by the corresponding entity who has jurisdiction of the road. Item 2, curb and gutter and storm sewer should be placed as proposed in the preliminary plan. Item 3, as proposed, the newly constructed HDI Court would become a street under the jurisdiction of Bloomington Township Road District. HDI Court should be transferred to the city of Bloomington upon completion and acceptance by Bloomington Township Road District. Number 4, HDI Court will be connected to Bunn Street that is under the jurisdiction of the city of Bloomington. HDI Court under the jurisdiction of the city of Bloomington would provide systems continuity and logical termini. And finally, number 5, the intersection of Bunn Street and Hamilton Road needs to be signalized with additional turn lanes to increase the level of service at this location. And that's my amendment.
Do I have a second to that amendment? I have a second by Member Rogel. Discussion. Member Friedrich.
I agree with that. Has anything been brought up with Bloomington Township Road Commissioner on this? There's wordage in there. That's part of it. And I understand it does address part of that. But also another concern of mine is Hamilton Road, the expansion of that. And there's always kind of been a dispute down in that area. And I feel badly for the township and their underfunding in that. And the city's reluctance in addressing that problem. It's complex. There's a railroad issue where they're trying to tie all this in together, and I completely agree with you, Member Klein, but there's even more concerns than I have on that, and that's Hamilton Road and that area as well.
To that, I would only respond that this was what Jerry Stokes put forward as his concerns and remedies, so I don't know the topic well enough, but I understand your concern.
Any communication with the Township Road Commissioner?
If I could, I would just recommend the committee limit its consideration of the evidence to what's been submitted in the record. And I think there's maybe a letter from the Township Commissioner in the record, but anything else could not be considered.
My only concern about that 5 criteria that was identified is if we approve this with the 5 criteria and one of those is not met, for instance, just as an example, there is no stoplight at Rhodes and Bunn Street, does that, or there's no intention of that, then does that mean this project cannot proceed?
By adding it as part of the special condition, are we not enforcing that as a requirement before the permit can be issued?
So we would be asking the applicant to pay for that, should the municipalities or the townships not proceed?
So I'm just going off of the wording that was in the amendment that was provided by the County Highway Department. And it says that the intersection of Bunn Street and Hamilton Road needs to be signalized. We could adjust that to say that the applicant I don't know, Mr. Sierra, can we instruct that the applicant has to fund the signalization? We certainly, it says with additional turn lanes, that's getting into the jurisdiction of the county.
But see, Hamilton Road doesn't go through yet.
This is the intersection of Bunn and Hamilton. It
There
says.
is no intersection to Bunn and Hamilton presently. No, that's roads. There, okay. What were they wanting expansion then for that? Oh, making it wide, a turn lane. Okay, I'm sorry. So I think we have a question. Can we identify that funding for this has to, and it's not just that, it would be for all 5. Is that accurate? All 5 criteria would have to be funded by the
Well,
applicant?
Looking at that, it's the construction of the road for number 1, which I believe, yes. Number 2, it's gutter and storm sewer that is already in their plan. The HDNI court is about transference of ownership. Number 4 is about jurisdiction, the transfer of the jurisdiction. It's really number 5 is the question, is about the additional signaling and turn lane. And that, I don't know if it's within our purview to require private funding on a public road.
The other thing that I'm questioning is the ownership and jurisdiction. The jurisdiction, the township would take the ownership, I guess, I think that's how it read, and then the jurisdiction would be transferred to Bloomington. Will Bloomington take it? I mean, I think these are the things that if we approve this based on that criteria, those 5 criteria, and one of them is not met, does that mean that this project doesn't proceed?
Any condition needs to be tied to the criteria and be necessary to make that criteria apply. So if, for example, with funding the intersection signage, is funding that necessary for the, the facility so designed and located and proposed to be operated, the public health and safety and welfare will be protected. I'm not, if that's the committee's opinion that that is necessary, that,
Mr. Sierra, I think it's actually criteria number 6 to which it is applicable. The traffic patterns to and from the facility are so designed as to minimize the impact on existing traffic flow. Criteria 6.
so again, same thing would apply if you, in the committee's opinion, that is necessary for that condition to be met, then the committee should add it. I can't provide any advice on the funding mechanisms for street signage. That's not something that I'm familiar with just offhand. So if there is a statutory scheme for how those kinds of signage are imposed, this condition could potentially conflict with that. I just can't give you an answer offhand.
So just to complete the question, so if we impose it without any description of the funding mechanism, it's essentially between LRS and Bloomington Township about how that goes. In other words, we're not telling anybody who has to pay for it, but we're deferring to that negotiation, which would happen between the company and the entity regulating the signage and turn signals and turning lanes, at that intersection. Is that correct? We're essentially moving the responsibility down.
I agree. That's acceptable.
So I have a motion
We do have a motion,
for that amendment.
and we have a second. I have the motion, the amendment, I wrote it here, was made, and it was seconded by Rogal, right? So we had Klein and Rogal. All in favor of the amendment proposed by Member Klein of adding that 5 criteria to condition number 3, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That motion passes. Now we have to go back and vote on special condition 3, knowing that the 5 criteria have been added. Does everyone understand?
You mean 1.3?
No, it's condition 3
Oh, I see.
that then, because we have 3 special conditions that then bring us to 1.3. All right, so we will ultimately vote on 1.3. But for special condition 3, all in favor of special condition 3 as it was amended, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That motion passes. Now we're going back then, based on that, to adopt the findings that the proposed facility satisfies that siting criteria 1.3. May I have an amendment or a motion? We have a motion by Member Abraham and a second by Member Klein. Any discussion? I need to have a point of order very quickly. Any additional discussion? I was just clarifying our motions is all. All right, no additional discussion, so all in favor of adopting the proposed facility satisfying the citing criteria, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Aye. One opposition, that would be Member Went. That motion passes. And if I am not correct, I believe we have done what we've needed to do. Is that accurate?
I believe that is correct, Madam Chair. I will prepare the recommendation, or the findings of fact on pages 18 and 19 of the hearing officer's report, and include the amendments that were made today, and that will be forwarded to the county board as this committee's recommendation.
Seeing no other business, this public review meeting is adjourned.